Now we'll look at seed-producing plants. These are the gymnosperms, like conifers, and the angiosperms, the flowering plants. Here are your learning objectives. Conifers flourished around 300 million years ago. This would be the same time as the evolution of reptiles, the earliest amniotes. Amniotes don't rely on water for reproduction, and neither do conifers. They have the vascular system and stomata that evolved in ferns, but this group evolved reproduction using pollen and seeds. No water is necessary for their reproduction. Let's first look at what pollen is. It's a little packet with sperm inside. Moss and fern sperm swim, so they require water to get to an egg. Pollen-producing plants pack their sperm inside these little structures, the pollen grain, which protects them from drying out. The pollen can blow around in the wind until it reaches an egg. These, by the way, are pollen-producing cones. They're the male pine cones. The eggs of conifers are found inside the female cones. They're the ones you're probably familiar with. The eggs are located inside these female cones. The pollen blows into the cone and fertilizes the egg. That will grow into a seed. A seed is the little embryo with a supply of food and a protective outer coating. That allows the embryo to survive a period of dormancy and grow when conditions are best. Now let's look at the life cycle of a conifer. Again, this image is very complex, so we'll draw our own life cycle. Now we'll look at conifers, or the seed-producing plants. Angiosperms are very similar. We'll start with the sporophyte stage because that's what we're most familiar with. There's our pine tree, and that's a sporophyte. If we look at a twig, there will be some little male pine cones, and there can be a female pine cone. Oh boy. Okay, that's a pine cone. Inside each of these structures are the gametophyte stage. I'm going to make a very tiny G because it's a microscopic structure that only lasts briefly as it produces the eggs and the sperm. The sperm gets blown around by the air and will blow into a different pine tree, but we'll just use it here. It fertilizes this egg, and that will grow into a seed. The pine cone will open up, and the seed is released and flutters down to the ground. This is a seed, not a spore. The seed will land in the ground and begin to grow a new pine tree. If we review with this image, here's our sporophyte. It produces these male and female cones. Inside each of those cones is the gametophyte stage. It produces the sperm and the egg, and then fertilization will happen. You have a little zygote inside of a seed. That seed then grows into a sporophyte stage. Every life cycle we've drawn includes a sporophyte, a spore-producing form of the plant, and a gametophyte, a gamete-producing form of the plant. The sporophytes have 2 copies of each chromosome. This is called 2N. It results when a sperm with 1 complete set of chromosomes joins with an egg with another complete set of chromosomes. The gametophyte generation only has 1 set of chromosomes, or 1N. If we look at all 3 of these life cycles, the alternation of generations, the gametophyte stage of the moss is very long. The gametophyte stage of the fern is a little bit shorter, and the gametophyte stage of a conifer is very short. The sporophyte stage is very short in the moss. It's much longer in the fern, and virtually the entire age of this conifer or the seed-producing plants are the sporophyte stage. If we compare our 3 life cycles, we see that mosses have a very short sporophyte stage and a very long gametophyte stage. The ferns have a longer sporophyte stage and a shorter gametophyte stage. The seed plants have a very long gametophyte stage and these very tiny, short-lived gametophytes. This corresponds with the movement from wetter environments to drier environments. What is the benefit of a longer sporophyte stage? If you have 2 copies of each chromosome, of each gene, then if there's a mutation that occurs in one, you have a spare. Up on land, there's more exposure to oxygen and UVB radiation, both DNA mutagens. Angiosperms, or flowering plants, evolved around 200 million years ago. They have the vascular system and stomata found in ferns and gymnosperms, and they reproduce using pollen and seeds, like the gymnosperms. The evolutionary advance in this group is the dispersal of pollen and seeds using a mutualistic relationship with animals. Pollen contains the sperm of a plant. Seeds contain the embryos of a plant. Flowers attract animals to the plant with color or some type of reward. The animal gets dusted with pollen, and then the animal is drawn to another flower. It'll transfer the pollen, improving the efficiency of fertilization. They generally don't just rely upon the wind blowing the pollen around. They can produce less pollen by using insects or other animals to transfer their pollen from flower to flower. Seeds are encased in a fruit, which is often used as a reward for animals. The animal eats the fruit with the seeds inside, and then the seeds, with their protective coating, survive their trip through the animal's digestive tract and get deposited in a nutrient-rich plop of poop. It's a very successful way of distributing the seeds, creating a greater range for the species. Many students confuse pollen dispersal with seed dispersal. Please make sure you understand the difference and can differentiate these two. Now let's look at the structure of a flower, how pollination occurs, and how a fruit with its seeds develops. There are 6 structures of the flower that you should know. The petals are used to attract the pollinators. When a pollinator visits one flower, the anthers contain the pollen grains that will be deposited on the pollinator. Then, when a pollinator visits another flower, those pollen grains land on the sticky stigma. The sperm inside the pollen begin to travel down this tube called the style, down to the ovary and into an ovule. The ovule, when fertilized, will become a seed. The ovary will become the fruit. Let's look at how that fertilization happens inside the seed. Fertilization in flowering plants is called double fertilization because 2 sperm from the pollen grain fertilize 2 different parts of the ovule. One part is the egg. When an egg is fertilized by the sperm, it becomes a zygote. That will grow into the baby plant. That's what you would expect. But then the second sperm fertilizes this part of the ovule, and it grows into a structure called the endosperm. That will become the food source for the zygote. So double fertilization makes the zygote, the embryo, and the endosperm, the food. There are a lot of other structures inside this ovule. Some of them disintegrate, some are destroyed as fertilization happens, but those aren't important for this class. Don't worry about them. What is important is one sperm fertilizes the egg, that becomes the zygote. The other sperm fertilizes this structure, which becomes the endosperm. Each seed, then, has a little embryonic plant and a food supply. That double fertilization refers to the seeds, how they develop. But what about a fruit? The fruit actually grows from the ovary. Inside the ovary are those ovules, which becomes the seeds. So a fruit is just this fleshy, developed ovary that has the seeds inside. A vegetable is anything that grows from a vegetative part of the plant, like the roots, stems, or the leaves. Take a moment to identify each of these food items: cucumbers, broccoli, cinnamon, and sweet potatoes. Are they fruits or are they vegetables? The cucumber is the only fruit. Cinnamon comes from the bark of a tree. Sweet potatoes are the roots. Broccoli are stems and undeveloped flowers. They haven't developed an ovary or seeds, so they're not a fruit. Fruits use animals and other methods to disperse their seeds. Most of the time, fruits are ingested by vertebrates that can travel far distances and deposit those seeds away from the parent plant. Some fruits, rather than developing delicious food for seed distributors, will instead make little hooks to attach to birds or mammals or other animals to get them to transport their seeds. Some fruits build pressure up until they burst and flick the seeds out. And some seeds are dispersed by wind or water. Next time you visit a grocery store, take a look at all the produce and identify each as an actual fruit or a vegetable. Many things are labeled as vegetables that are actually fruits, and consider how those fruits are able to use animals to distribute their seeds.